What if you checked into the hospital and no one ever let you check out? The first thing Daniel remembered was the beeping. Slow, steady, mechanical, like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. He blinked against the sharp, fluorescent glow overhead. The ceiling tiles looked ordinary, but there was something about the light. It hummed, almost breathed. His throat was dry, raw. A plastic tube tugged uncomfortably at the crook of his arm. He turned his head and saw the IV bag hanging beside him. Clear fluid dripped down, but when he focused, the drops didn't fall naturally. They hovered for a fraction of a second before sliding down, as though gravity itself worked differently here. He tried to sit up. Pain shot through his abdomen, hot and sharp, reminding him why he was there. Appendectomy. Nothing major. He remembered checking into Mercy General, signing a few papers, being wheeled into the operating room. White masks, cold instruments, the anesthetic mask lowering over his face. And then, nothing. Until now. The room around him was plain. Too plain. The white walls were bare, without clocks, calendars, or even a TV. The window was covered by heavy curtains, stitched shut at the edges so he couldn't move them. A faint buzzing sound echoed beyond the door. Daniel pressed the call button. He waited. Nothing. He pressed it again, harder this time. No footsteps, no voices, no nurses, just that steady beep and the buzz outside, like power lines humming too close to his ears. Finally, the door creaked open. A nurse entered. At least Daniel thought she was a nurse. She wore scrubs, pale blue, but her face, he froze. Her skin looked stretched too tight across her skull, her features slightly blurred, as if someone had painted them on and then smeared the canvas. Her smile was wide, too wide, the corners pulling almost to her ears. "You're awake," she said, though her lips didn't quite sync with the words. Daniel's stomach lurched. "Yeah. Could I get some water?" She tilted her head, bird-like. "Water." The word came out flat, like she'd never spoken it before. She left without another word. Daniel sat there, pulse racing. He thought of ripping the IV out, of stumbling to the door, but before he could act, she returned. A paper cup trembled in her hand. She held it out. Daniel took it, fingers brushing hers. Her skin was cold, too cold. He sipped. The water was thick, almost oily, leaving a film on his tongue. He forced it down. "Where's my doctor?" he asked. Her head twitched. "Doctor will see you soon." "When?" "I need to call my family. They'll be worried." Her smile widened, splitting her cheeks slightly. "No calls here." Daniel froze. "What do you mean, no calls?" She didn't answer. She just walked to the far wall and pressed her hand against it. Without warning, a door slid open where there hadn't been one before. The hall beyond stretched unnaturally long, vanishing into shadow. "Rest," she said, before stepping out and letting the wall seal itself shut again. Daniel's chest tightened. His fingers dug into the sheets. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He yanked the IV out, ignoring the sting. Blood dotted the sheets. Swinging his legs over the bed, he pushed himself up. Every muscle protested, but adrenaline carried him forward. He went to the main door, the one she'd used earlier. The handle turned easily. The hallway outside buzzed with the same electric hum, but it wasn't like any hospital hall he'd ever seen. The walls were lined with doors, dozens, hundreds, all identical. Each door had a number, but the sequence was wrong. 201, 947, 13, 666. They repeated, reversed, skipped. Daniel picked one at random. He opened it. Inside was another patient, an old man with sunken eyes. He sat up, grabbing Daniel's wrist with surprising strength. "Don't stay here," the man hissed. "They'll keep you. They'll never let you out. I've been here for..." He broke off, choking on a sob. "I don't remember how long." Daniel's skin prickled. "What are you talking about? This is just a hospital." The man laughed, bitter and broken. "Hospital? No! This place isn't for healing. It feeds." Before Daniel could ask what he meant, the lights flickered. A shadow passed across the ceiling, something massive crawling above. The man's eyes widened with terror. "They're coming," he whispered. "Go! Now!" Daniel stumbled back into the hall. The buzzing grew louder, almost deafening. The lights flickered again. Down the corridor, several nurses stepped out of the walls themselves, unfolding like paper turning into flesh. Their faces were blank this time, smooth skin, no features at all. They started walking toward him in perfect unison. Daniel turned and ran. The hallway shifted beneath his feet. Doors slid, walls bent, and the corridor stretched longer and longer the faster he ran. His breath caught in his chest. He turned a corner, only to find himself back at his own room. The door swung open by itself, and inside, waiting on his bed, was another Daniel. His double sat calmly, IV still in place, smiling at him with a face too familiar to be real. "Welcome back," the other Daniel said. Daniel froze in the doorway, his chest heaving, sweat pouring down his back. His own eyes stared back at him, calm and steady, from the bed where he had woken not long ago. The other Daniel sat upright, IV still in place, a faint smile curling across his lips as though this scene were perfectly natural. "What the hell are you?" Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. The double tilted his head, studying him the way a scientist might study a specimen in a glass case. "I'm what you left behind, the part of you that doesn't get out." Daniel shook his head violently, clutching the doorframe as though it would steady him. No, you're not real. You're some hallucination from the drugs. I just need to wake up, that's all." The double chuckled softly. The sound was identical to Daniel's own laugh, yet it felt wrong, hollow, as though echoing from a dark tunnel. "You think this is anesthesia? Think this is a dream? You've already woken up. You're here because you belong here now. They don't make mistakes." Daniel's skin crawled. He stumbled back a step, but the hall behind him shifted again. Walls stretching, buzzing, flickering. The faceless nurses were gone, but he had the sickening sense they weren't far. "What do you mean belong here?" he demanded. The double's smile faded. He leaned forward, the IV tugging at his arm but not tearing loose. His voice dropped, almost conspiratorial. "This place chooses. It takes people when they're most vulnerable, under the knife, on the edge of life. You signed the consent papers, didn't you? You handed yourself over, body and soul." Daniel's throat closed up. His mind raced back to the forms he'd signed before surgery. Just a standard waiver, he'd thought. He barely even glanced at the fine print. His stomach twisted with nausea. "This is insane," he muttered. "I'm leaving, right now." The double's expression hardened. "Try and see how far you get." Daniel turned and bolted, heart hammering. The hallway bent again, pulling away as if it didn't want him to escape. He passed door after door, each one rattling as though something inside wanted out. He forced himself not to look, not to stop. Finally, he reached what looked like an elevator at the end of the corridor. Its doors stood slightly open, flickering fluorescent light spilling out. Daniel shoved himself inside and slammed the button for the lobby. The doors creaked shut. The elevator groaned. For a moment, he felt weightless. Relief surged through him until he noticed the buttons. They weren't labeled with numbers. Instead, each button had a word. Admit, observe, treat, hold, feed. The one he'd pressed, what should have been lobby, glowed red. Feed. The floor lurched beneath him. The elevator plunged downward faster and faster, shaking violently as though it might tear itself apart. Daniel gripped the railing, teeth rattling, every muscle locked with terror. Then, silence. The doors slid open. A cold draft swept in, carrying the smell of antiseptic, rot, and something far older, something earthy, like a grave left open too long. Daniel stepped out. The corridor here was different. The walls weren't sterile white anymore. They pulsed faintly, like living flesh. Long tubes ran along the ceiling, pumping thick, dark fluid that dripped occasionally onto the floor. Shadows darted in the corners, just out of reach of his eyes. He walked cautiously, each step echoing too loudly. The silence pressed in, suffocating. Then he heard it, muffled voices. He followed the sound until he reached a massive ward. Rows of beds stretched endlessly, each occupied. Patients strapped down, IVs snaking into their arms, mouths gagged. Some writhed weakly, others lay still, their skin pale and waxy. Their eyes, though, every eye followed him, wide and desperate, pleading silently. Daniel's stomach turned. Oh my God. A figure emerged from the shadows. A doctor. At least that's what the coat suggested. But his face was wrong. Eyes too large, too deep, his mouth a narrow slit that never moved as he spoke. You shouldn't be here, the doctor's voice rumbled, though his lips never parted. Daniel stumbled back. What the hell is this place? What are you doing to them? The doctor's eyes gleamed. We are keeping them, sustaining them. They give, and the hospital takes. It is balance. Balance? Daniel shouted, his voice cracking. You're torturing them. These are human beings. The doctor tilted his head, regarding him with something like amusement. You misunderstand. They are not patients. They are resources, as you will be. He snapped his fingers. From the shadows, the faceless nurses emerged again, gliding soundlessly. Their arms extended impossibly long, fingers stretching like needles. Daniel's heart pounded. He turned to run, but the doors slammed shut. The nurses closed in, their blank faces tilting curiously, as though savoring his fear. He backed into one of the beds. The patient strapped there, a woman with hollow cheeks, suddenly jerked her head toward him. Her gagged mouth strained against the cloth, muffled screams pouring out. Her eyes pleaded desperately. Daniel grabbed at the straps, trying to free her. His fingers shook as he tore one loose. The nurses drew closer, their long fingers reaching. The woman's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. Her nails dug deep, her strength unnatural. Her eyes locked with his. They'll never let you leave, she rasped through the torn gag. But if you want to survive, run! The nurses lunged. Daniel ripped free, sprinting toward the far wall. The corridor stretched again, but this time he didn't hesitate. He threw himself at the wall, and to his shock, it split open, swallowing him whole. He tumbled into darkness, the hospital vanishing behind him. When he hit the ground, he was back in his original room. The IV was still in his arm. The monitors still beeped. The stitched curtains still covered the window. And on the chair beside his bed sat his double, smiling patiently. Told you, the other Daniel said softly. You can't leave. Daniel lay frozen on the bed, staring at the other version of himself seated calmly in the chair. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, but it seemed to grow louder with each passing second, sinking with his panic, mocking his fear. His double leaned back, legs crossed, as though this whole situation was nothing more than a casual conversation. You need to stop fighting, the double said, his voice low, measured. The more you resist, the more it hurts. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat painfully dry. Who are you? What are you? The double's smile never wavered. I told you already. I'm what's left behind. Every patient here has one. A shadow, a reflection. Call it what you like, but only one of us gets to leave. Daniel's stomach churned. Leave? People don't leave this place. That's what everyone keeps saying. The double's eyes gleamed. Most don't. Some do. But only if the hospital lets them. Daniel's fists clenched around the bedsheets. He forced himself to sit up, ignoring the dull throb in his abdomen. Then I'll make it let me. I'm not staying here to rot. The double tilted his head, studying him like a curious animal. You really think you're different from the others? They all said the same thing at first. Before Daniel could respond, a faint sound drifted through the walls. A voice, soft, broken, yet undeniably human. It was chanting something, a string of words too muffled to make out. The double glanced toward the wall, expression flickering just for an instant. into something almost nervous. Daniel noticed. He slid off the bed, ignoring the IV line tugging at his arm. "Who's that?" The double shook his head slowly. "You don't want to know." But Daniel was already moving. He yanked the IV free, ignoring the sting, and pressed his hands against the stitched curtains. To his shock, the fabric gave way under his touch, parting like damp paper. Cold air seeped in, and beyond the window there was no outside world, only another corridor, darker than any he had seen yet. Daniel climbed through. The floor was cold beneath his bare feet, sticky with something that clung to his skin. The walls pulsed faintly, like veins just beneath the surface of flesh. The chanting grew louder now, clearer, dozens of voices whispering in unison. He followed the sound, every step echoing unnaturally, as though the hall itself was amplifying his presence. The passage opened into another ward, but this one was different. Instead of beds, the patients were suspended upright in glass cylinders filled with a pale, viscous fluid. Their bodies floated limp, wires and tubes threading into their flesh. Some looked fresh, their eyes fluttering weakly. Others were skeletal, long decayed, their faces locked in silent screams. Daniel's stomach lurched. He staggered back, gagging, but forced himself to keep looking. Each cylinder had a nameplate at the base. His eyes scanned them, heart thudding harder with every step. Eleanor King, 1923. Thomas Green, 1857. Rachel Holloway, 1704. He froze. His skin prickled cold. These people weren't just years old, they were centuries old. And yet their eyes still flickered open as he passed, following him, pleading silently. The chanting grew louder. Daniel turned and saw the source. At the far end of the ward, a cluster of patients huddled together on the floor, their hospital gowns torn and filthy. They rocked back and forth, whispering the same phrase over and over again, their voices blending into a sickening chorus. He crept closer, straining to hear. "Never leave, never leave, never leave, never leave." One of them suddenly snapped his head toward Daniel, eyes bloodshot and wild. "You're new," the man rasped. "Fresh, strong. They'll use you first." Daniel's breath caught. "Use me for what?" The man crawled forward, fingernails torn and bleeding. "To feed it, to keep it alive. The hospital needs us, needs all of us. And once it has you, you'll forget who you are, just like we did." The others echoed his words, rocking harder, their whispers rising to a feverish chant. "Never leave, never leave, never leave." Daniel stumbled back, his spine pressing against one of the glass cylinders. Inside, the skeletal figure twitched suddenly, slamming its hand against the glass with a deafening crack. Daniel cried out, shoving himself away. That's when the alarms began. A shrill, piercing wail filled the air, and the patients shrieked in unison, clawing at their own skin, tearing at their restraints. The walls shuddered, pulsing violently, and the floor began to split open beneath him. Daniel ran, his feet slipping on the slick surface, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The corridor twisted, bending, folding back on itself, and suddenly he was somewhere new. Another hallway, narrower, darker, lined with flickering lights. And at the far end, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice. A door. A real door. Wooden, old-fashioned, with a brass handle. It looked impossibly out of place in this nightmarish hospital. It looked human. Daniel sprinted toward it, lungs burning, every instinct screaming that this was his only chance. He grabbed the handle and yanked it open, only to find himself standing in the lobby of the hospital. At first, relief flooded him. He saw chairs, potted plants, a reception desk. Normal. Familiar. But then he noticed the details. The plants were dead, their leaves black and shriveled. The magazines on the tables were blank, every page pure white. And behind the desk sat another nurse, her face hidden in shadow. Daniel approached cautiously, his legs trembling. I want to leave, he said, his voice cracking. Please, just let me leave. The nurse lifted her head slowly. Her face was featureless, like smooth clay. Her voice seeped out, chilling and metallic. Checkout is not permitted. Daniel backed away, chest heaving. Why? Why not? The nurse rose from the desk, unfolding to an impossible height, her limbs stretching, bones cracking with each movement. Her voice boomed, shaking the walls. Because you already did. Daniel's vision blurred. What? What do you mean? The nurse extended one long, skeletal finger, pointing toward the far corner of the lobby. Daniel turned and saw himself again. But this time, it wasn't a reflection or a shadow. It was his body, lying cold and still on a gurney, a sheet pulled halfway up his chest, his face pale and lifeless. Daniel staggered backward, the world spinning, his heart monitor in the room, the surgery, the anesthesia, the signing of papers. He wasn't a patient anymore. He was a corpse. Daniel's knees buckled beneath him. He pressed his back against the cold wall of the lobby, his gaze locked on the gurney in the corner. His body, his real body, lay motionless under the sterile sheet. The face was unmistakably his, slack, drained of color, lips parted as if frozen mid-breath. He wanted to deny it, to scream that it wasn't him, but the truth hollowed him out from the inside. I'm dead, he whispered, his voice trembling. The faceless nurse loomed above him, her elongated arms hanging like ropes of pale muscle, the smooth oval where her face should have been tilted slightly, as though mocking his despair. No, she said in that metallic, layered voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not dead, not alive, claimed. Daniel shook his head furiously, palms pressed against his temples as if he could crush the words out of existence. No, that's impossible. I was supposed to wake up from surgery. I'm supposed to leave. The nurse took a step forward, her legs bent at wrong angles, her knees creaking like splintering wood. You signed. You agreed. This is your room now. Forever. Her words cracked something inside Daniel. Rage surged through the despair. He shoved himself to his feet, pointing a shaking finger at her. I never agreed to this. I signed a hospital waiver. That's it. The nurse cocked her head. Do you remember what it said? Daniel froze. He didn't. He had signed it quickly, distracted, just another pile of paperwork. The nurse's voice dropped into a whisper that slithered into his ears. It said your body, your spirit, your stay, until the hospital is done with you. Daniel stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. His legs trembled, but he forced himself toward the door, the real front doors of the lobby, tall glass panels that led outside. His hands slammed against them. Cold glass met his palms. He pushed, shoved, kicked. Nothing. They didn't budge. Beyond the glass, he saw only darkness, not streets or parking lots, just endless black stretching forever. A sound grew behind him, a deep rumbling like 1,000 voices whispering at once. He turned, and the entire lobby was changing. The reception desk melted into the floor like wax. The dead plants twitched, sprouting jagged, blackened vines that writhed across the ceiling. The faceless nurse stretched taller, her arms elongating into needle-like limbs that scraped against the walls. Daniel bolted sideways, through a hallway that hadn't been there before. His feet slapped the tile as he ran blindly, panic driving him forward. The hallway twisted and pulsed like an intestine, the walls narrowing, expanding, forcing him to squeeze through in places. The whispering voices grew louder, circling him, until he broke into another vast ward. This one was different still. Here, patients sat upright in chairs, lined in neat rows that stretched endlessly. Their bodies were frail, some skeletal, some bloated, but all of them were tethered by thick black tubes that vanished into the ceiling. Their mouths hung open, and from their throats came the whispering, a ceaseless droning chant. Daniel's stomach turned to ice. He crept closer, and his chest tightened as he recognized the words, "Feed it, feed it, feed it, feed it." The chant rose and fell like waves, filling the room with an oppressive rhythm. Their eyes rolled in their sockets, white and lifeless, yet their mouths kept moving, repeating the words as if the hospital itself controlled them. Daniel staggered between the rows. He whispered hoarsely, "What are you feeding? What is it?" One patient's head snapped upright, faster than seemed possible. A young man, barely older than Daniel himself. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, but for the first time Daniel saw true awareness. "The heart," the young man croaked. His lips trembled as blood trickled from the corners of his mouth. "The hospital has a heart. Deep below, we all keep it alive, and when it beats, it grows." Daniel's breath hitched. "What happens if it stops?" The man shuddered violently, his body jerking against the tubes that bound him. His voice was barely audible now. "Then it dies, and we die with it." Suddenly, alarms shrieked again, harsh and metallic. The patient's chant grew louder, more frenzied, until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate with it. The tubes feeding into them pulsed, black liquid surging upward into the ceiling like a grotesque tide. The young man's eyes locked with Daniel's one last time. "Run, before it notices you." Daniel didn't hesitate. He sprinted through the rows, lungs burning, ears ringing from the chant. A door appeared ahead, a massive steel door with no handle, just a slit of darkness where it met the floor. Without thinking, Daniel pressed his hands against it. The door opened. On the other side was a stairwell, spiraling downward into blackness. A cold wind rose from below, carrying the smell of damp earth and blood. The steps seemed endless, carved into stone rather than built by human hands. Daniel gripped the railing and began to descend, each step echoing like a drumbeat. The deeper he went, the more the whispers faded, replaced by something worse. A heartbeat. Slow, heavy, thunderous. It shook the stairs beneath him, rattled his bones, pressed against his skull until he thought his head would split. The deeper he went, the louder it became, until each beat was like the slam of a colossal hammer. Finally, the stairwell opened into a cavernous chamber, and there it was. Suspended in the center of the room by a web of pulsing veins and tubes was a heart the size of a house. It glistened wetly, its surface slick with blood, every contraction sending a spray of black fluid into the tubes above. The floor around it was covered in shallow pools of liquid, reflecting the monstrous organ with nauseating clarity. Daniel staggered forward, hand clamped over his mouth to stifle a scream. His knees weakened beneath the sheer enormity of it, the wrongness of it. Every beat shook the air, rattled his teeth, thudded against his chest like it was sinking with his own heart. He wasn't alone. Figures stood in the shadows of the chamber. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their bodies twisted, skin pale and stretched. They wore tattered hospital gowns, their eyes hollow. They faced the heart with arms raised, swaying in rhythm with its pulse. Daniel tried to retreat, but one of the figures turned. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and when it opened its mouth, Daniel recognized the voice immediately. It was his double. "Welcome," it said softly. "You finally reached the heart." Daniel froze, the pulsing of the organ drowning out his thoughts. "What do you want from me?" he croaked. His double's smile gleamed in the half-light. "Not me. It. It wants everything." Behind him, the heart gave a shuddering lurch, and then it skipped a beat. The chamber fell silent, the figures stopped swaying, and all of them, every single one, turned to face Daniel. The room was silent, except for the sound of Daniel's breathing, ragged and shallow as though his lungs were struggling against the air itself. He sat hunched in the wheelchair, his hands gripping the cold metal arms until his knuckles turned white. Across from him, the old man in the patient gown stared back with watery, pale eyes that seemed bottomless. The man's voice had been gravelly, torn from decades of screaming. "You shouldn't have come here," he repeated, his lips trembling as though the act of speaking hurt him. Daniel wanted to ask who he was, how long he'd been here, but his throat closed up, and the words choked inside him. The man leaned forward, his thin hands shaking as he pointed toward the ceiling. They're listening, always listening. If you say too much, they make you disappear, just like the others. His gaze darted toward the empty bed across the room. There was another patient here this morning. I don't even remember his name anymore. That's how it starts. Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears. The air felt thicker now, heavy with an unseen pressure. He rose slowly, wheeling himself toward the man, desperate for answers. How long have you been here? He whispered. The old man's face twitched, as though recalling the memory caused him pain. Decades, maybe longer. There's no time here, no sun, no night, no clocks. You stop counting after a while. You only remember the screams. His lips peeled back in something that wasn't quite a smile. And you'll be screaming soon, too. Daniel's stomach twisted. He wanted to deny it, to say the man was insane. But he remembered the shifting halls, the empty doors, the doctor's impossible smile. This wasn't madness. This was real. Suddenly, a high-pitched tone pierced the room, like the sharp screech of a hospital intercom. Both men flinched. The sound was deafening, digging into Daniel's skull like nails. A distorted voice crackled overhead. Room 13, patient Daniel Harris, returned to surgery. The intercom cut out, leaving a silence more suffocating than the noise itself. Daniel's blood froze. They had called his name. They knew where he was. He looked back at the old man, who was already shaking his head violently. "Don't go," the man rasped. "If they take you back into surgery, you don't come out human." Before Daniel could reply, the door handle rattled. His breath caught. The sound was too slow, too deliberate, as though someone were savoring the moment of entry. The old man's eyes widened with terror. He hissed, "Hide! Now!" Daniel shoved himself off the wheelchair, half stumbling across the room, his body still weak but fueled by adrenaline. He slid beneath the bed, pressing his body flat against the cold tile, just as the door creaked open. From his hiding place, he saw them, 2 nurses. Their shoes clicked against the floor, but their legs bent strangely, too many joints moving in the wrong directions. They dragged the wheelchair toward the center of the room, whispering in a language Daniel couldn't recognize, low and guttural. He could just see the edge of their faces from below, skin stretched too tightly across their skulls, eyes unblinking and black as tar. The old man in the gown began muttering to himself, rocking back and forth. One of the nurses snapped its head toward him, the motion sharp and unnatural. Then it spoke, its voice layered, as though multiple tones overlapped at once. "You've said too much," the old man screamed. His voice was raw, filled with decades of terror. The nurses moved as one, their bodies jerking forward unnaturally fast. Daniel clamped a hand over his mouth, fighting not to cry out as he watched in horror. The creatures grabbed the old man, dragging him from the bed with a strength that belied their thin frames. His nails scraped across the floor, leaving streaks of blood as he kicked and pleaded. "Don't let them take me," he howled. "Please!" His words echoed like a death sentence. And then, just like that, he was gone. The door shut behind them, and silence returned, suffocating and absolute. Daniel lay frozen beneath the bed, his heart hammering so loudly he feared it would give him away. The room was empty now, but the air carried a new chill. Slowly, he crawled out, his hands trembling as he wiped sweat and dust from his face. The wheelchair sat abandoned, its wheels still faintly spinning. He felt hollow, like something inside him had cracked. That man had been real, he had existed, and yet he was erased as though he'd never been here at all. Daniel staggered toward the door, pressing his ear against it. Nothing. Only the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the ever-present throb of something mechanical deep in the walls. He stepped out into the hallway, gripping the frame for balance. The corridor stretched endlessly, but this time, it felt different. Alive. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, expanding and contracting like lungs. The lights flickered in a rhythm that almost resembled a heartbeat. Daniel forced himself forward, ignoring the nausea rising in his stomach. He needed to find a way out. He needed to escape before they came for him again. After what felt like hours, he reached a door at the end of the hall. It was marked with a single word, painted in peeling black letters. Exit. His chest seized with hope. He rushed forward, shoving the bar with all his strength. The door slammed open, flooding him with a blinding white light. For the first time since waking up, Daniel felt fresh air, cold and sharp against his skin. He stumbled through, gasping, desperate for freedom. But when his eyes adjusted, the hope died instantly. He wasn't outside. He was standing in an operating room. The walls gleamed with steel instruments, glistening under harsh surgical lights. A massive table waited in the center, straps hanging loosely from its sides. Monitors beeped steadily, their screens already displaying his vital signs. His name flashed across one in glowing red letters. Patient, Daniel Harris. Status, prepped for surgery. A voice spoke behind him, smooth and too cheerful. "We've been waiting for you, Daniel." He turned slowly, dread filling every vein. The doctor stood in the doorway, his grin impossibly wide. But this time, his face was different, like it was peeling back, layers of skin sliding away to reveal something else beneath. Something not human. Daniel's chest heaved as he staggered back, the cold surgical lights casting shadows across the doctor's peeling face. The skin sloughed away like melting wax, sliding down in thick globs that hissed when they struck the floor. Beneath it wasn't flesh, not as Daniel understood it, but something that shimmered and shifted, like liquid metal trying to imitate muscle. The doctor's eyes, once the reassuring brown of a human man, now stretched wider and wider, until they were nothing but black pools that swallowed the light whole. "We've been waiting for you," the voice repeated, except now it wasn't the doctor's voice at all. It was layered, hundreds of tones stacked upon one another, male and female, child and elder, all speaking in unison. The sound vibrated inside Daniel's skull, like a chorus of souls trapped in a single throat. Daniel stumbled against the operating table, his palms pressing against the icy steel. His breath fogged the air. What are you?" he croaked. The thing tilted its head, strands of skin dangling loosely. "We are the surgeons of eternity. We repair what time destroys. We harvest what reality discards. And you, Daniel, are ready for the procedure." Its grin stretched so wide the corners of its mouth split open, revealing rows of teeth that kept going, deeper than any human mouth could possibly hold. "No," Daniel whispered, his legs threatening to buckle beneath him. "I didn't choose this. I didn't come here." "But you did," the creature said, stepping closer, its footsteps making a wet, sucking sound against the tile. "They all do. Every patient. Every soul that wakes in these halls chose the hospital. Some in dreams, some in bargains, some in moments of weakness. You called for help, Daniel, and we answered." The words struck him like a blow. He tried to recall. Hadn't he been in a car accident? Yes, he remembered headlights, screeching tires, the crunch of metal. Then darkness. His body ached with phantom pain, as though pieces of it had been torn away. Slowly, it dawned on him. He hadn't survived that accident. This wasn't recovery. This was something else, something worse. The creature stepped closer, the light above flickering wildly, shadows writhing across the walls. Daniel's hands fumbled against the surgical instruments on a nearby tray. Scalpels, clamps, needles gleaming in the sterile brightness. He seized a scalpel, his hand shaking violently. "Stay back!" he shouted, though his voice cracked with terror. The Dr. Thing's grin only widened. "Defiance is natural. They all resist. But once we've opened you up, once we've seen the shape of your soul, you'll understand. You'll be grateful." With a sudden jerking motion, it lunged. Daniel slashed wildly, the scalpel slicing across its arm. Instead of blood, thick black fluid oozed out, bubbling and steaming on the floor. The creature shrieked, its many voices blending into a wail that rattled Daniel's bones. The sound forced him to his knees, his ears ringing with unbearable pressure. And then, silence. Daniel looked up. The operating room was gone. He was standing in a hallway again, but not the endless sterile corridors he had wandered before. This hall was narrow, suffocating, with walls made of flesh that pulsed like veins. The lights overhead were faint, glowing orbs that dripped with liquid. The air stank of rot and antiseptic. Behind him, the door had vanished. There was no way back. He stumbled forward, the floor sticky beneath his feet, until he reached a window in the wall. Behind the glass, he saw rows of patients strapped to tables, their mouths gagged, their eyes wide with eternal terror. Some were human, others were not. Limbs twisted into shapes that didn't belong. Faces melted into blank skin. Their chests rose and fell, but none of them ever stopped screaming. The sound was muffled behind the glass, yet Daniel felt it inside his bones, vibrating with the rhythm of his heartbeat. One of the patients turned its head toward him. Its eyes were his own. Its face was his face. He stumbled backward, bile rising in his throat. No! 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 His mind reeled, spinning in a cyclone of terror. Was he looking at himself? Another version? Or was it his future, strapped down forever, just another body in the endless rows? The glass shuddered. A crack spidered across it, then another. The patient with Daniel's face pressed against it, mouth opening in a silent scream that stretched impossibly wide. The glass shattered outward. Hands seized him. Dozens of hands, all clawing, pulling, dragging him toward the gaping void. He thrashed, kicked, screamed, but the strength of the grasp was unbreakable. As he was yanked through, the world folded inside out, the walls collapsing like paper. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. And then, Daniel was back on the operating table. Straps cut into his wrists and ankles. A blinding light burned above him. The surgeon loomed overhead, its face now fully shed of human disguise, a writhing mass of tendrils and teeth. Instruments gleamed in its many hands. "The procedure begins," it intoned. Daniel screamed until his throat tore, but the straps didn't budge. The scalpel descended, catching the light as it hovered above his chest. "Don't worry," the surgeon whispered, its many voices crooning as one. "You won't remember this. No one ever does. That's why no one leaves. Because once we've finished, you'll be ours forever." The scalpel pressed down. White-hot pain exploded through Daniel's chest. His vision blurred, his mind fracturing into fragments of light and shadow. He tried to cling to a single thought, a single shred of identity, but it slipped from his grasp like water. Darkness swallowed him. When his eyes fluttered open, he was in a hospital bed, a white room, a window with sunlight streaming through. Machines beeped softly beside him. A nurse in a normal human uniform smiled down at him. "You're awake," she said warmly. "You've been through quite the ordeal, Mr. Harris. But don't worry, you're safe now." Relief surged through him like a tide. He blinked, trying to steady his breathing. Maybe it had all been a nightmare. Maybe the accident had left him hallucinating. He turned his head to look at the sunlight streaming in. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. And then he noticed the window. The sunlight didn't move. It froze in place like a painted backdrop. Daniel's blood ran cold. He turned back to the nurse, his mouth dry. She was still smiling, but her eyes were black, deep, and endless. "Welcome back," she whispered, and the intercom crackled overhead. "Patient Daniel Harris, surgery complete, room 13 ready for the next."